What's up, everybody? What's up, solutionaries? We're going to get started here shortly. We're a little early. I wanted to, when we're doing these lives, I want to make sure that we are giving proper introduction to the folks that are 1,000% very, very generous with their time, and just making sure that people get their flowers and genuinely like acknowledge how far back some people have been on this Black Guns Matter journey. The guest today, he's behind the curtain right now. We're gonna pull him up here in a quick second. But the guest today was one of my very first interviews. I'm talking about eons ago, like 1,000 years ago. And my assistant at the time reached out and was like, "Hey, this guy named Zuby wants to interview you, and he's not from America." And I was like, "That sounds cool." And since then, Zuby has went on to be an international force. And I think that there's a lot of times when people are talking truth and objective truth, right? Or up the middle, even if it's their truth, it's objective and it's up the middle. I think a lot of times what happens is people don't get the love and energy and attention that they should. Even if they are getting love and attention that they are getting, I personally believe it should be a whole lot more. And Zuby represents a lot of that for me from my personal perspective. So we're going to get started a little bit early. He'll give me the thumbs up when he's ready. But I just want to make sure that everybody's following Zuby. When you see him, when you hear him talk, obviously, if you're from America, you'll hear that he may not have an American accent, which means he may be from somewhere else. He may be well-traveled. I know a lot of Americans, we tend to be in one place and just stay there the whole time. But I want to challenge everybody in this conversation to kind of think about that from a global perspective without necessarily being a globalist. I want people to understand that there's a different connotation for those words. But make sure that you look into Zuby, see some of the stuff that he's done. One thing comes to mind as it relates to like smashing some particular world record with the greatest of ease. But look into those things and make sure that we're supporting the people that are having these genuine conversations. So without further ado, Zuby, if you're ready, we can get started right now. What's up, my brother?
Yo, Maj, good to see you, brother. How are you?
I'm great, man. How are you?
Yeah, doing great, man. Doing great. I'm out in Dubai right now.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a great place to start. That's not something that the general public in America hears unless they're going on vacation, right? It'll be, "Oh, I'm out in Dubai," and they'll be like, "Oh, you're on vacation?" Let the folks know what you're doing in Dubai, who you are, where you're from. Because like I was saying before you came on, I think everybody knows you, especially internationally, but I don't think people know you. You get what I'm saying? I think you do a really good job of like being very open and honest, but at the same time being very like, I'm not going to tell you too much about me. So tell the people what you're doing in Dubai, if you've been there for a while, how long you're there for, and just kind of a backdrop of who you are as a human.
Sure thing, man. Well, Dubai is my home now, officially. I moved here. I've been a resident for about a year, but I actually got a place here in March. Yep. So this is now where I live. In terms of my background, it's pretty complicated, but I'll make it simple. I was born in England. My family is originally from Nigeria. Both my parents are Nigerian. I grew up in the Middle East as well, so I've done a full circle. I grew up in Saudi Arabia. I lived there for 20 years in total. I went to school there from kindergarten to 5th grade. I was actually in international school during that time. And then I went to boarding school from the age of 11. Yeah. So between the ages of 11 and 20, I was living in Saudi Arabia, but I was going to school and then eventually university in the UK. I studied at Oxford, very famous university worldwide. I got a degree in computer science, graduated when I was 20. And I also started rapping when I was in university. So I released my first album when I was 19 years old. And that was the sort of spark that set it all off. And then after I graduated, I took a year out, did my music full time for a year, moved to London, worked in the corporate world for 3 years while moonlighting as a rapper, having this sort of dual career lifestyle going on. And then in 2011, I quit that job and I became a full-time musician. So from 2011 onward, I was just a full-time rapper. And then in 2019, I was still doing music, but I started to gain attention from other things. It's the same year I started my podcast, same year I had that deadlift video blow up, same year that I released Like I said, I started my podcast and released my first fitness book that year. And that's also the year that people outside the UK really started to discover me.
Yeah.
So from 2006 to 2019, pretty much everybody who knew me or had heard of me was probably from the UK, and they really just knew me because of my music. It's like, oh yeah, that's that rapper with the Oxford degree. It was kind of my, it was a little bit of a unique selling point. And then 2019 is when it flipped. From 2019 onward, my biggest audience has been in the USA. That's true of my music. It's true of my social media, true of my podcast, true of my merchandise sales, true of every single thing that I do now. The USA is actually my biggest audience, with the UK now coming in at number 2. So there was this flippening that happened in 2019. And now people know me at this stage for a lot of different things, no longer primarily for my music, but a lot of people know me as a social or cultural commentator, a voice of reason. People know me for my fitness stuff, my writing, X, YouTube, whatever it might be. I have a lot of irons in the fire. I like to talk about a lot of different things. And so that's who I am.
So you said something that sparked a question for me. Your biggest audience is in America. What was the reason? And I want you to be completely raw and unfiltered. I feel like
Sure.
Zuby always has, for the viewers that are here, Zuby always has a very stoic demeanor, generally, unless he's smiling, right? But I want you to be very, very honest, because in doing a little bit of international traveling myself, I'm 1000% aware that America, we tend to have it good in some areas, in some aspects, and we take a lot of stuff super for granted in other areas. But there's some reasons why somebody would say, even though my largest fan base is in America, I'm gonna go live in Dubai. What was the reasoning and the weight behind that decision?
Wow. Okay. Well, I think there were sort of two questions there. I think initially you were asking about how it became to. Were you asking initially how it came to be that the U.S. was my biggest audience?
No. Just
why I chose to move.
That too, because
okay.
I have my assumptions on that. I think when you smash that that deadlift record, I think every dude in America was like, where like all of the common sense is kind of leaving it a bit. I think all of the Americans are like, thank you, right? But in seeing that, why did you decide on Dubai as opposed to the United States, where you already had such a large fan base?
That's a really good question, man. So from 2021, in 2021, I basically felt like I left the UK in spring 2021. This was at the peak of the goofiness, of the hysteria with the Rona, I will call it.
Yeah.
It was getting very concerning. It was getting very concerning. And you have to remember that in the UK, we don't have different states. So it's not like, there's no Texas, there's no Florida. It's not like, oh, I'm in California and I don't like how it's going, I'm going to move to Texas. It's like the whole UK is kind of operating under the same system. And it was trending in the Canada, Australia direction. It never got as bad as those countries. But the way people were talking, the policies they were suggesting, that's where it was going. And I was like, you know what? I'll tell you what, Maj, like it was actually a pretty heartbreaking moment. Like I remember the day I made the decision that I need to leave my country.
Yeah.
And it was kind of bittersweet because in the long term, I knew that I never had ambitions to stay in the UK for decades and decades.
Yeah.
But the way it happened just wasn't pleasant. Like it left a very bitter taste in my mouth. I was just like, man, I feel like my hand has been forced. And you guys are going so hard in this direction that I really just lost faith. Honestly, to be honest with you, Maj, I lost faith in a lot of Western nations. I don't know if I've ever sort of explicitly said that in an interview before, but I was just so disappointed seeing large swathes of the USA, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, France, Germany, like every country that is supposed to be free, just going super authoritarian. I was just like, man, has this just been a facade my entire life? Like I'm someone who's pretty awake and skeptical about various things, but I was just like, man, this whole thing about us having rights it's not even real. Like if it's just,
it's looking like
there's
a straight facade at this point.
yeah, that was the thing. And it wasn't, a lot of people think that I left because of the government, but I'll tell you what, I was more disappointed by the people than I was by the government. It would have been one thing if the government was proposing mandates and lockdowns and mandatory masking and trying to force the jab on people and all that, and people en masse were pushing back against it.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of people were not just complying, but they wanted to punish those who weren't. And I was just like, I've studied history a little bit, and I was just like, man, this is gnarly. And I don't know how aware of how it was in lots of different countries you are. But in some nations, dude, there were some countries where, like in Europe, I mean, I'm sure you know, like the Canada and Australia situation, but in Europe, in places like France, Germany, Austria, Lithuania, like some of these countries that aren't so much on lots of Americans' radar, I mean, they were doing things like you couldn't put fuel in your car without proof of having the shot in the arm. If they had classes where every single day at school, this was particularly, I think, in Germany and maybe Austria, every student who hadn't had the shot had to stand up at the front of the class and explain themselves to their class. Yes. See, people aren't aware of this type of stuff, right? So dude, there was so much weird stuff that most people to this day, like, they don't even know that it happened. Because most people were just like in their own country, right? Even more so than usual. And so they only got the lens of what it was like around them. But I was getting, reports from people all around the world, followers. I got followers in every single country, and people are just sharing all these stories and telling me what it's like. And then I'm seeing the UK suggesting doing some of these same policies that they're doing in these places. And I'm just like, you know what? I'm out.
Yeah.
Like I can't wait and see.
Yeah.
and I'd also seen, remember at this point, it was getting to the point in places like Canada, remember, they made it so you couldn't even leave. In Australia, they made it so you couldn't leave. So I was like, boy, like, I have passport, I will travel. If it's, I was just, I can't take the risk. I cut the lease short on my apartment. And I remember calling my parents, and I was just like, Mom, Dad, I'm leaving. I don't even know exactly where I'm going to end up, but I'm just out. So to fast forward a little bit, for the last 3 years, up until March this year, I was living a life of what I call luxury homelessness. So from May 2021 until March 2024, I had no abode, no house, no apartment, no anything. I was just living out of a suitcase, traveled to over 20 different countries during that time frame. So it's only in the last few months where I was like, okay, cool, I'm going to settle on Dubai. So roundabout, let me come back and actually answer your question. I was going to move to the USA. I got my US visa. And I was actually planning on moving to either Texas or Florida, most likely Austin, Texas.
Yeah.
And then when I just factored in everything, and I thought about the next 5 years, the next 10 years, I thought about starting a family and just thinking of all the different aspects of it, the UAE just made more sense for me.
Right.
Because, I mean, in terms of the specifics.
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, in terms of the specifics, one of the major ones, of course, is the UAE, to the joy of libertarians, is virtually a tax-free country. There's no income tax. There's no capital gains tax. They've just introduced like a 5% VAT and a 9% corporation tax on profits over $100,000 a year. But this is compared to the UK, which is 25% corporation tax, and obviously personal tax and capital gains tax in the 30 to 40 something percent range. So as a high income earner, I was like, this will save me millions of pounds over the course of my lifetime. And that's not just money that's like, I want to buy flashy stuff with. That's money for my future children. Right. That is money that's money for my future family, which I would like to, have starting in the next couple of years. Yeah. So that's one factor. Safety. one of the safest countries in the entire world. There's virtually no crime here,
Yeah.
Except like the most elite sort of white collar crime that may exist anywhere. Super clean, incredible travel hub, very much on an upward trajectory. So when I'm seeing all of these reports coming out of the UK, USA, France, Germany, everyone's always complaining the cities are declining, the cities are declining. I want it to be in a city that's getting better.
Yeah.
Right? Every single day, this place is getting better. And so I first came to Dubai like 20 years ago, and just seeing what it's like now, I can look out the window of my office and I can see the tallest building in the entire world. And that's pretty inspiring. And it's also a fantastic travel hub. So I can I can get to Florida in 15 hours. I can get to the UK in 6 hours. I can get to Australia in 14 hours. I can get to, whether I'm going east or to the west, there's direct flights from Dubai to pretty much everywhere. Yeah. So I can get to anywhere within a day. I can fly direct to California. It's a long flight. It's about 19 hours, but I can fly direct to LA or San Francisco if I need to. So it's not like me living in Dubai means that I can't go to the USA and I can't spend time there. Like, I still spend tons. I've been to the USA 4 times this year so far. And it's only August. I've been to the UK 4 times. So I still travel a whole ton. But in terms of setting up my headquarters and my tax residency and all of that stuff, it just made more sense for me to go to from the UK to the UAE rather from the UK to the US. That would just be swapping HMRC for the IRS. Yeah. Right. So now, so I was just like, you know what? I just want to be out of that matrix if I have the opportunity to. So if I'm going to move and I'm going to do a whole country move, let me not just go to somewhere where I think is going to be better for me, but let me go to where I think is going to be the best option for me, at least for the time being. If that changes in the future, then, I can change when I need to.
So there's always this, especially from people that have never been there, right? There's always this internet, the internet's I refer to the internet as like Diddy. Diddy was the best thing for hip hop and the worst thing for hip hop at the exact same time, right? The internet's kind of like that, right? With information, it's all of the information in the world, but it's all of the complaining in the world at the same time. And a lot of time it's about things that people have never been to, they never whatever. What are some of the major, as I'm sure you've heard, what are some of the major pushbacks when people go, oh man, you moved to Dubai, you moved to a desert, it's not a real city. Somebody made that city. And in my mind, I'm like, well, every city was made, you know what I'm saying? But what are some of those misconceptions that you've heard that you could dispel some of those myths for some of the people?
Yeah, sure. Well, bro, you have to remember, I've been dealing with this my entire life. I grew up in Saudi Arabia. Yeah. Can you imagine being like a 12-year-old kid in England, telling people you live in Saudi Arabia and the kind of questions that they're asking you? And remember, this is like over 20 years ago, like prior to people are actually surprisingly a lot more informed now, but still, if I were to say the top three you're always going to get as soon as Dubai is mentioned on any social media post is you're going to get people who think that the entire city is built on slave labor and that slavery is like legal or something like that.
There's no way. There's no way that people think that, bro.
Huge numbers of people think that. Yeah, people literally think, they'll say that it's a slave state, and they'll say that even by me living here that I'm somehow supporting slavery or human trafficking and stuff like that.
Wait. So they mean like actual, like not mental slavery. They mean like they think that in Dubai, this amazing place with the largest pool ever, they think that there's like whip and chain, like
they think it's all built by slaves. So I can explain what the reality is. Yeah. The reality is that there are hundreds of thousands of foreign contractors from countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and so on, who do a lot of the manual labor and a lot of the construction in the city. It's the same in Qatar. It's the same in Saudi Arabia. And the working conditions are not always they're not always brilliant. Okay. Like there are some horror stories, and the way that some of the accommodations, for example, that people living, or perhaps some of the working hours. So to be upfront and clear, like this is not like people come here voluntarily to work, right? Yeah. So it's not like people are enslaved or slavery is legal. Like slavery is absolutely illegal. But there are people who break the law, right? There's people who break the law. There might be someone who hires a contractor or maybe hires like a maid for their house or a nanny for their children and doesn't treat them as well as they should or whatever, right? Like, so, but it would be a bit like someone is talking about I'll tell you what's strange. Like, I'll get to the other points. My brain's just dancing around. The thing that happens when it comes to the Gulf countries or Islamic countries in general is people like to compare the very worst things that happen in them.
Yeah.
And also to sometimes just invent stuff. And they like to compare that to the very best of their country. It would be like, if I told someone that I like the USA or that I'm going to the USA, and by the way, there are people who do this, and someone immediately wants to talk about like the very worst aspects and the very worst things that happen in the USA, and they want to talk to me about school shootings and mass shootings and the opioid crisis, and they want to talk, people are like, bro, there's so much jacked up stuff. The USA has 1 million times the amount of crazy stuff going on in it as the UAE does. Yeah. But it would not be an honest. I could also say that, I could also argue that the USA was built on slavery, right? I could argue the UK, like the whole British Empire. I mean, if you really want to play that game and talk about places being built by slaves, it's like, dude, how far do you really want to go?
Do we want to go back to how far in antiquity? What part of the globe? What time period? The dynasty? Yes.
Yeah, and then we could talk like real slavery, right? Yeah. Instead of using the term loosely to describe labor like under conditions that are imperfect to you by Western standards, right? So that's one thing. So that's the first one. The second one is the whole idea of like that women are oppressed here. Which, have you ever been to Dubai?
No, I have not been to Dubai. I've only been to Abu Dhabi.
If you want to see some of the least oppressed women in the freaking world, come to Dubai. Like the idea, it's like,
I feel like there's a Dubai campaign PR team that's like, say this stuff so nobody comes here.
No, yeah,
like,
dude.
We can keep it perfect if we scare people away.
Well, it's one of the most visited cities in the entire world. I think they had like 20 million visitors last year or something. And a huge chunk of those are women. Now there's women here from all over the world moving here in droves very voluntarily. And this isn't just the safest. It's funny when people talk the safety angle, because I cannot think of a safer city for a woman to live in.
Yeah. Like,
I've traveled a lot. I've been to 45 countries and I've been to well over 100 cities. And I'd say like, yeah, Dubai, maybe Doha in Qatar, Abu Dhabi. These are quite literally the safest cities in the world. Whether you're a man, a woman, you could go for a jog at 3 a.m. with your headphones in as a woman. You won't even bat an eyelid. People don't lock their cars. Yeah. People and people have nice cars here. Like people, you've probably seen. You can go on YouTube and see videos of people like, I'm going to leave my wallet and my laptop in this area, and I'm going to go for a walk. They come back 2 hours later, nothing has moved. Right? Like I've left my phone and stuff in taxis twice. Like this is the one city where like if I leave something in a taxi, like I've got it back within an hour.
Yeah.
It's stupidly safe. The danger actually is if you get used to how safe it is here, you could go to travel to another part of the world and get a little bit complacent because you get so used to just like not even worrying about that kind of stuff. So that's the second thing, the whole idea of women being oppressed. I would say the third one is broadly the idea that like there's no freedom. Or that, which is again is just insane. Like people are so ignorant. The church I go to here, which is one of, I think there's 20.
Wait, Zuby, you're allowed to go to an actual Christian church there?
Maj, do you know that one of the biggest Catholic parishes in the entire world is in Dubai?
I know now, but I just know that when people are like, yo, if you're not Islamic there, they're going to throw you off that tall building. And I'm like,
dude, no. So there's freedom of religion here.
Yeah.
There's over 20 churches just in Dubai. By the way, keep in mind, Dubai is one city. Dubai is a city in the UAE. Dubai has 20 churches. The church I go to here has 7 services every Sunday, 2 locations. They're actually looking for a 3rd location because it's so packed. Like it's big, like thousands of people. Like I go to church in the UK and like it's 50, 60 people at the local church I go to. I go here, I need to make sure I'm on time. Otherwise, like I'm going to end up in the overflow room because it's so packed. No, so there's people here. Dude, you can be there's Orthodox Jews here. Like you'll see Jewish people walking around with like the yarmulke and the sit and everything. There's tons of Hindus. 20% of the population is Christian. Most people don't know that. Obviously, a lot of Muslims. Islam is the dominant religion, but religious tolerance. They are massive on religious tolerance here. Like it's one of their core. It's actually like one of their core values. The only thing, because I want to make sure I give like both sides of everything. What you can't do, what you cannot do, is you can't try to convert the local Muslims, right? So you can't. If I went out with of course, I can have my Bible, I can go to church, whatever, I can practice my religion. But if I were to like go out on the street and I'm standing outside a mosque with my Bible and I'm there like I'll be arrested real quick, right? So that is not, so someone might be like, see, I told you there's no religious freedom, right? So it's not like, you can do, by the way, aren't people being arrested outside like freaking abortion clinics and stuff in the UK and US? So again, like the whole the freedom of speech thing is, and then people talk about freedom of speech. And again, the thing, do you know what it is here is like, what the rules are.
Yeah.
So what's funny about freedom of speech is due to my own personal beliefs, I actually feel like more free to speak here than I kind of do when I'm in the UK.
What do you mean?
So what I mean is in the UK, like, dude, why are people in our countries, in the UK and the USA, what are the things that people are afraid to voice?
You are not allowed to dissent. You're allowed to, depending upon how much power you kind of grab and influence that you have, you may start to get some pushback. If you are, I don't know, maybe more focused on nationalism instead of globalism, and you happen to be like a billionaire that owns a whole bunch of hotels, they may try to steal an election from you. They may try to shoot you, like those type. But you have to become very, very powerful and influential for those levels of mechanisms to try to like get you, right? But okay, but like I didn't even get I had a great run on Twitter and like Instagram saying wild stuff before I actually got kicked off. So it's really, are you influencing people to a level where you've gotten our attention and you're impacting our money and our power? But other than that, you can pretty much say anything, but you're going to get pushback. Now that's just from the government, but you're going to get pushback. It's coming. Yeah. So this is interesting to me because people, firstly, the UK doesn't have freedom of speech in the way the USA does. The USA is the only country I'm aware of where you sort of have like almost unrestricted freedom of speech from the legal perspective. UK, there's hate speech laws. Every country in Europe, there's hate speech laws. Islamic countries, there's hate speech laws and so on. But what I find fascinating is for the past 10 years in both of our countries, the vast majority of people in both our countries, British people, Americans, are afraid to say what they think, especially if they're conservative or right-leaning. Yeah. They're afraid. How many millions of people are afraid to say that they voted for Trump or that they're considering for voting for him, right? Do you think you'd be, I'll tell you what, man, I'd feel more comfortable wearing a MAGA hat, walking around Dubai, then no one would touch me. In fact, if someone did touch me, they are going to jail, right? Right. But like as you know, like I don't know if I wear that around LA or I wear that around New York or whatever, I might have an altercation because I'm just wearing a hat. You've got people who are afraid to say that men can't get pregnant. You've got people who are afraid to push back against the extremes of the LGBT stuff. Why do you think there's men and female freaking sports happening all around the West? Why do you think that you've got people that are having their children snatched away from them because they don't want to trans them? Like all that goofy crap. Like people want to talk freedom. I'm like, bro, I'm free from all of that here. Right. And I'm free from all of that. Also like, more so there in that regard because what I've noticed in, Arab nations, Muslim, Islamic nations, and as opposed to America, there's a culture of decency that is somewhat being, not even somewhat, it's being eroded in America. And so like you wouldn't necessarily get arrested for saying some of those things, but like I do whatever I want because most people know, like, yeah, Maj is in the gym and Maj has a gun. So like it's like we shouldn't say that to him. But if I was like a person that was more frail and was not as known for what I do, I definitely could understand how so many people would feel like lunch meat. And the irony, to your point, the irony of somebody saying you're not free in Dubai to say X, Y, and Z. No, I am, because the culture of decency is like, hey, that's how you feel. And if you're welcome to feel that way, just don't litter and just don't try to proselytize people or convert people to your way of thinking. You can just have a general conversation. That person can make those decisions for themselves. You said something as it related to, men and women's sports. I want to go back to, I think that some of your fame in America skyrocketed after you absolutely obliterated that world's women weightlifting record. Tell me, what was the impetus? Like, what popped in your mind and said, okay, that's enough. Okay, let's see how silly this is. Let me explain it once and for all through visual. What was going through your mind? And explain to folks what you actually did, because that was all over the place.
Man, I wish it was once and for all, but it's still freaking happening right now as we speak on a global scale. Okay, so this is going back 5.5 years ago now.
Yeah.
So February 2019, I posted a tweet of me doing a 230 kilo deadlift. That's about 520 pounds, I think. And it was an easy lift for me. I could have done it multiple times. And I just posted it and I said, hey, I keep hearing about how biological men have no strength advantage over women in 2019. So watch me destroy the British women's deadlift record without trying. P.S. I identified as the woman while lifting the weight. Don't be a bigot. So those are very famous words now. But, at the time I tweeted that, I had 18,000 followers. That's 1/8. As we speak today, I'm over 1.2 million just on the same platform. And I thought it was funny, but I didn't know it was going to do what it did.
Yeah.
So I just put it out. Like I've got well over 100,000 tweets over the years, and I just put it out there thinking, this is kind of funny. It'll get some LOLs or whatever. And as soon as I hit the tweet button, I was just looking at my phone, and the numbers were just going up, and I was like, what is happening?
Yeah.
Within about 10 minutes, the video had 10,000 views.
Yeah.
20, 50, 100, 200. Like, it's, by the time I went to bed that evening, it was at 300,000. I wake up in the morning, it's at 500,000.
Yeah.
Breaks 1 million the following day. And this thing is just getting retweeted and shared all over the internet, different countries, UK, USA, but people are commenting in different languages. Like, people were just going nuts over it. And I remember sort of seeing who was sharing and liking and retweeting. And I was seeing some like big names there. I was like, oh, retweeted by Piers Morgan, retweeted by Ben Shapiro, retweeted by Stephen Crowder, people I'd followed online for all of these years in these spaces. And you have to keep in mind, at this time, I'm just an independent rapper from England. I'm just like at my pop-up shop selling my merch.
Right.
And I'm just like, I don't know what I've done.
Yeah.
But something is happening. And then I started getting contacted by the media, BBC, Sky News, The Telegraph. Then it goes out to, Fox News, Sky News Australia. Like, all of these started in the UK. And then within a couple days, I start, and then I said, Tucker Carlson did a segment on it on Fox News. Ben Shapiro does a video where he's like reacting to it. And I'm just like, what is going on? This is crazy. This is just off a 9-second video and like a caption I thought off the top of my head.
Right.
And this went on for weeks, bro.
Yeah.
I remember there was a time period where I was gaining 100 followers per hour for several weeks on end. So I went from 18,000 followers to 20K, 30K, 40K. When I was around 40 to 50K, I think, I remember waking up one morning. This is like This is about 3 weeks after I initially posted it. And I wake up one morning. Keep in mind, I'm in the UK at this time, so I'm so you have to like consider the time zones. I'm 8 hours ahead of Los Angeles. I wake up one morning. So morning time for me is nighttime in LA, and my phone is going bonkers. Yo, Joe Rogan just shouted you out. Joe Rogan just mentioned you. Yo, Zuby, Joe Rogan, right? I'm just like my DMs are flooded, right? My DM, I'm just like, wait, like what's going on? So I went and I listened to like the Joe Rogan episode from I guess like the previous night.
Yeah.
And he did a section where, you know, he pulled it up and, oh gosh, who was the guest on the show? Brian Callen, I think, was the guest on the show. And they did like a 2-minute segment just reacting to it. And Joe's like going crazy. Joe's cracking up. He's like, yo, who is this guy? Zuby, I'm following this guy right now. Like this guy. Yeah. And then at the end, he's like, you know, shout out to Zuby. I'm following him right now. And so I see that. So now, like, you know, Joe Rogan's following me on Twitter. And I just sent him a message just saying, yo, man, like, you know, I'm a fan. Like, thanks. And he was like, dude, that's like one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. Like, I'm so, he's like, this stuff is getting ridiculous. I'm so happy you did this.
Right.
And then, and so I guess this would have been like April. And so I managed to continue the momentum for several months because not just off of the tweet, but I kept getting invited on interviews and podcasts and things like that. So people got a chance to discover my personality. They could go on my YouTube channel, discover my music, right? It wasn't like I had nothing to show. Right. I was already an existing entity. I'd been building up my career for the past decade. So once the spotlight was shown on me, I was able to like pull all of these hundreds of thousands of people in. Yeah. And then I got invited. First of all, actually, the first like really big podcast I was invited to do was actually Dave Rubin, the Rubin Report. Yeah. So I got invited on the Rubin Report, and he was also in LA at the time. How things change, man. Everyone's left LA. Yes. So he invited me to LA to shoot for his show. And I was like, oh, I'm in LA. Joe's also in LA. So I just messaged Joe and I was like, yo, man, I'm going to be, I'm coming to LA. I'd love to be on your show, like if there's a chance. And he was just like, heck yeah, when are you coming? And I was like, oh crap, like I'm going to be on Joe Rogan. So I went out to the States in September 2019 and I ended up staying for 3 months. Yeah. Yeah. I thought I was going to just do like an LA trip, and then it expanded into San Francisco, Austin, Dallas, DC, Nashville, New York. I ended up getting invited to the freaking White House. Yeah. I ended up doing Tucker Carlson's show when he was still on Fox News. I did it. I met Candace Owens, did an interview with her. I did a Sunday special with Ben Shapiro, Adam Carolla. Like I was just getting invited onto all of these different shows. Yeah. And, you know, it's actually beautiful the way that it happened in many ways, because I'm glad those opportunities came when they did. Yeah. Because, you know, as an independent musician who started out in my late teens, like, you know, you always want to like, man, I wish I had this opportunity. I want to get on this platform. I want to blow up or whatever. And, you know, if I'd gone on Joe Rogan when I was like 25 years old, I wasn't, you know, I've always been smart, but I wasn't as good at articulating myself as I am now, right? My worldview is much better formed, and I can now sit on a podcast with a very, you know, with anybody, you know, whether it's Ben Shapiro or it's Tucker or it's whoever it may be, and I can really like explain what I think and why I believe what I believe, and I can talk about like a range of different issues. So it came at a good time. And so this is all like 5 years ago. And then over the last 5 years, I've just continued to do what I do in the different angles: music, podcasting, writing, social media, videos, interviews like this. And the audience has just continued to grow. And I've now got, you know, several million people around the world who follow me and appreciate what I do on some level. And that is, that's a massive blessing. You know, I'm happy to be here.
Who do you credit that towards? I know Nigerian. Are you Igbo?
Igbo, correct. Yeah.
Nigerian parents are like, hey, this is happening. Like this education information thing is happening. Do you credit that ability to learn and go to Oxford and be multifaceted? Would you credit it more to your parental upbringing, or this more not recent? I say recent for lack of a better term, this more recent worldview that's allowed you to polish yourself in a way that you can get on any platform and articulate these concepts, whether you're talking about politics and politics from an international perspective, knowing these breakdowns in the UK, knowing the understanding of what's happening here. Most people don't even know what Lithuania is. Would you credit that to more of your travel, or would you credit it more to those parents going like, hey, this is what's going down?
All the above. I think I have to give first credit to God, because God made me, and any talents and skills and intelligence that I have, I didn't necessarily make that happen, right? I was just born with my personality type and IQ and proclivities. And so that part is just a blessing. Massive thank you to my parents and all of my siblings. I'm the youngest of 5 siblings. They raised me extremely well, gave me a lot of opportunities, allowed me to see different parts of the world and meet all sorts of different types of people and experience different cultures from a very young age. From, by the time I was 5 or 6 years old, I'd been to more countries than most people ever go to. And I'd met more people from more nationalities and religious backgrounds and ethnicities than from a young. I was just surrounded by everybody.
Yeah.
Which is a main reason, which is one of many reasons why I think I find concepts like racism extraordinarily bizarre. I remember I think I first heard about racism when I was about 8 years old or 9 years old. I think that's when I first heard the word. I want to say it was in a history class. It may have been. I would have been in Saudi Arabia at the time, right? I was in school in Saudi Arabia, and I was in the American school system. So I did K through 5 in the American school system, and it may well have been learning about the history of the USA and learning about the history of Black Americans and then also I remember learning about what happened in Nazi Germany and so. And I was like, wait, there's people who don't like other people because of because bro, I'm in Saudi Arabia, right? I'm surrounded by everybody. I have Arab friends, American friends, Canadian, African, Asian, we're all just together. There's no, this is why I sometimes chuckle when people do people are raging against multiculturalism right now, and multiculturalism doesn't work and everyone needs to be divided again. And what I'm like, lawlessness doesn't work. Right. I live in Dubai. Dubai is 90% expats. People are here from all over the world, and it's one of the most functional cities in the entire world. It can work, but you have to do it properly. You can't just have unchecked mass migration and just no integration and all of that.
Hey, let's get all of the rules and laws gone, and then let's just blame it on the skin tones of the different people there.
Yeah, it's dumb. But yeah, coming back to the question, sorry, my mind jumps around a lot when I have a lot to say.
This is fine, bro. This is great.
And so that's a factor, and just the travel certainly is a point. And then, as I said, I took a really unorthodox path in life, and I took a very unorthodox path even compared to all of my friends and family. So I was a very high achieving student, straight A student. Got into one of the best universities in the entire world, got a degree in computer science, graduated at the age of 20. I could have been, I don't know, one of these Silicon Valley guys or whatever. And then I was like, I want to be a rapper. Dude,
what did your parents say? Because that's coming. You got Nigerian parents and you say, yeah, I'm perfect at everything, but I want to do this. I need to know what they said to you and what look they gave you.
I'll tell you what, man, they've always supported me, always. Because you have to remember, it's not like if I'd wanted to drop out of university to pursue a rap career, that wouldn't have flown.
Yeah.
But it just started as a hobby, right? I'm there studying, I'm doing my classes and everything, and then I just started rapping for fun.
Yeah.
And then I drop an album. It wasn't until 5 years after my first album where I went full time with my music. So I was just juggling these different things. I worked in the corporate world. I was actually a management consultant from 2008 to 2011. That was the one sort of proper full-time job I ever had.
Yeah.
And then by the time I quit my job, I'd already sold a few thousand albums. I already had a small fan base. I'd already, done some tours and performed in different places. So it wasn't like I was leaving something to go start from zero.
Yeah.
Right. Like I already was a rapper. It was just like, hey, I want to go from part-time to full-time.
Yeah.
And my parents' view is, I'm this is one thing. There's a lot of things that makes my parents amazing, but as far as Nigerian or even African parents go, they're conservative in the right way and they're sort of liberal in the right way. So compared to the typical Nigerian parent, they're kind of liberal in their open-mindedness of their idea of, okay, we're not going to like force our kids to be doctors, accountants, and lawyers. If that's what they want to be, we're going to support them. But if one of them wants to go and be an entrepreneur, or wants to be a creative, an artist, or whatever, we'll support them. And we know that. And they also had trust and faith in me. They're like, look, if Zuby sets his mind to something, he's going to do it. So instead of trying to get in his way, or like, let's just support him. Like, let's support him. Like my parents wear my merch all the time, but they wear my merch more than I do.
Yeah.
Like to this day, they're always wearing my merch. Like they love it. They're so proud to say like, yeah, you know, like so someone might see my mom wearing one of my t-shirts and you know, recognize my name, and she'll be like, yep, I'm his mom, you know?
Yeah.
And so they just supported it. And, you know, it's hard to fully understand exactly how we all sort of end up the way that we are. It's a combination of everything, right? It's nature and it's nurture. Of course, there's my own effort as well, right? Before any of this blow up, I'd been on the street selling my CDs. Like I sold over 30,000 albums hand to hand in the UK, right? Do you know how many people you have to talk to do this? So like,
a lot.
Yeah. So I was doing like the grind, right? You know, the mixtape grind, right? There's guys in the States who, of course, originated that. So I used to do that, man, for many years. That's how I made my money initially. And then I moved into shopping malls and I started doing pop-up shops in shopping malls. So instead of just selling my CDs, I'd also sell my t-shirts, my hats, my hoodies, all of that. So I had like a kiosk in different shopping malls around the UK. And I would go there and I would just be talking to people all day from like 9 a.m. until 7 p.m. whenever the mall closed. And I would do that, you know, Christmas time, I'd do like 35 days straight, no days off.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of grind. So by the time came for people to kind of like discover who I am, there was this whole body of work that some people had seen, like a lot of people had seen it in the UK, but outside of the UK, of my very small fan base, people kind of thought like, oh, you know, he kind of came out of nowhere. And it's like, bro, I released my first album in 2006.
Right.
What do you mean what do you mean I came out of nowhere? I've got nine albums and EPs. So it sold tens of thousands of albums completely independently, no record label. Done and achieved like a lot of things independently, even just through my music. So even though that's not what people kind of know me for primarily now, all of that grind, all of that effort, all of that learning how to use social media, learning how to market myself, learning how to do this, do that. All of these are skills that I am now able to deploy whether I'm releasing a new book or I'm starting a podcast or whatever the case may be. These are skills that I've been accumulating since I was in my teens.
So you said something that's very key. And similarly, you know, I made music years ago. I've done that same thing, like Solutionary Volume 1, go to LA, press up 1,000 CDs, sell them at $10 a piece. You have no idea sometimes where your next meal is going to come from in those early stages. Even and seeing that same, there's a book by Ray Dalio called Principles. And he talks about this in these loops of like, you start something, you're absolutely horrible at it. You get better at it. You find success at it. And then like you're transitioning into this next thing. And there's another loop and you're transitioning and, oh, here's this thing again. And as you step back, you look at these loops that have built this lifetime, or in your case, I mean, damn near like over a decade of these lessons that you're now just applying into these other spaces, to your point of, hey, I'm glad that I didn't get on Joe Rogan or some of these bigger platforms until I had some of that seasoning and maturation to kind of get into that. I want to switch gears a bit because we're talking about gun talk and everybody's going to beat me up if we don't talk about the conversation around firearms, right? A few things. I am deathly afraid. Like I've been looking into, you know, I have a farm. I have the Solutionary Center. We're building a farm out. I own 40 acres in
Awesome.
Mississippi. Because similarly, around 2020, I was like, this is the zombie apocalypse. We are going to have food, right? And firearms were the thing that, for me, even though America is not as free as we pretend to be, or most societies are not as free as they pretend to be, firearm accessibility was a very, very is a very, very important thing to me, to be able to defend those things, minimally breaking the law or statute as much as possible. I personally, this is me, not everybody else, I personally do not follow any unconstitutional statutes at all. Me personally. However, if I can do that without, as much as possible without running afoul of those unconstitutional statutes, I'll do it. What has your experience been? And, because Dubai and some of the other places that you live, Saudi Arabia, are so culturally respectful and decent, has the firearm conversation for you been almost like a not that high on the priority list? Or is firearms ownership, much like other things in Dubai, misunderstood by people outside of Dubai?
So it's worth bearing in mind that the USA is a complete global anomaly when it comes to firearms. The USA is out there on its own.
Yeah.
Right. There is no other nation in the entire world, Eastern, Western, whatever it is, that has the sort of gun rights that the USA does, where it's just you have the right to bear arms and the government is not supposed to infringe on that. Yeah. I know they do infringe on it a lot, but due to the USA's unique history, they're the only country that has that. I think the countries with the next highest gun ownership rates are like Yemen, Finland, Switzerland, something like, I think maybe those three. But even there, it's very different, right? I think in Europe, Switzerland and Finland have the highest gun ownership, but it's way lower than the USA, and it's far more restricted. Yeah. And I'm not sure you're like ammunition is also like very limited. It's kind of like, you can't just like walk around with a gun in Switzerland. Yeah. And so the thing with me is, I understand the Second Amendment better than most Americans. And I also support it very strongly for the USA, not just for the sake of Americans, but I'll give you an interesting international perspective, which maybe you've heard before, but maybe you haven't. I think it's a relatively unique one, but I think the USA's Second Amendment is incredibly important for the world as a whole. I don't just think it protects Americans. I think it protects Brits, even though British people typically have a massive aversion to guns and are completely confused and frightened by the fact that Americans are allowed to own them. Same with the Australian attitude or the general European attitude towards it. Yeah. But I think that the American Second Amendment keeps not just the US government, but as a result, downstream from that, all of the Western governments in check, essentially. Yeah. Okay. We just lived through the most tyrannical period of our lifetimes. Yeah. Let's be real. The 2020 to 2022 period, it got gnarly. Yeah. Okay. If Americans were an unarmed population and they could have been rolled over in the same way that Australians were rolled over and Canadians were rolled over and the Brits and the French and the Germans and virtually all of these nations were just rolled over, just completely at the mercy of the government, it could have looked really bad, not just for Americans, but for all of us. Yeah. And one thing that I notice is even within the USA, you've always got sort of 50 experiments going on at once because of the states. Right. So you notice that, Hawaii and California and Maryland, they got pushed way harder than Texas and Mississippi and South Dakota and Florida, right? Like these things are correlated and most people don't notice these things, let alone pay attention to them. And when a government is going crazy, ultimately, this is not the way people like to think about society, but the truth is when push really comes to shove, things come down to the possible threat of violence. Right. That is what it ultimately comes down to, right? At the end of every law, it's going to be ultimately enforced by a dude with a gun.
Yep.
And as long as, if those laws are reasonable and they're righteous, and the people holding the guns are reasonable and righteous, then that's okay. One thing that I find bananas. See, I find it, maybe I understand the Second Amendment because I actually learned about it when I was in school, like in Saudi Arabia.
Okay.
Right? Like I learned a lot of US history. And so I understand why it exists. Most people, again, I'm not sure most Americans actually know why it exists.
No,
right?
at this point in juncture, the media narrative has really rocked a lot of Americans to sleep, especially, and I hate to say it in such divisive terms, but especially on the left. Like
for sure.
that media portrayal of gun has been like, oh no, they're the most evil thing in the world. So I 100% agree with you.
Yeah, I understand it. And it's because everyone imagines being on the end of it, right? They never imagine them being the one who has it. And so what was the point that I was just making there? Sorry, I lost my train of thought. What was I just saying?
The Second Amendment, learned about it in school. And because of that understanding for it.
Yeah, because of that understanding, I massively support it. I'm a massive 2A supporter for the USA. Do I think that it could be exported to another country? No, I don't. So really? No. Because
that's an interesting quagmire. Tell me why you think that.
No. Only the USA can have it. Because because of the historical and cultural context. It's a little bit like, okay, so I grew up in Saudi Arabia. In Saudi Arabia, alcohol is illegal. And you know what? I think Saudi Arabia should keep alcohol illegal. There's no upside for them making it legal. Like, it's a Muslim country. They're all on the same page, religiously, socially, culturally. Like, why would they want alcohol? But that doesn't mean I'm in favor of banning alcohol in the UK or the USA. Like, can you imagine even try to ban alcohol in the UK? Right? Like, no, because of the history, because of the culture, because of people's perceptions, right? So every country has a different history. And the USA, Americans have always had guns. America was founded by guns. Right? Fighting against the British, rebelling against the British Empire, and it became an independent nation because they were able to have that. And so they were like, hey, we need to put this in check to make sure that a tyrannical government can never rise up again. We don't want to be ruled over again. That's why the USA.
Do you think that if Dubai, let's use Dubai for the example.
Okay.
Listen, when there's that much money flowing, that much sun, it's difficult to start thinking about tyranny. I know. So I'm just going to ask you to challenge yourself. Is that clean? Is that decent? So let's challenge ourselves.
Sure.
Do you think that the government of the UAE, and let's isolate it just to Dubai. Let's just say just Dubai, right?
Okay.
Dubai just says, you know what? We're authoritarian, and we taking this whole. We going full Sharia law. We're going full. Boom. Do you think that the people of Dubai or the UAE would call out for a Second Amendment like some of the people in, let's say, Taiwan have? Right? Do you think they would call for it, or is it so far removed from? It's not ingrained, to your point of it being in the DNA, that they wouldn't even ask for it, even under those tyrannical scenarios.
Yeah. Well, firstly, it's funny because so many people already think that, Dubai is this horrible authoritarian tyrannical state. No. And that can't happen here because everyone would leave. So like, you have to remember, Maj, Dubai is 90% foreigners, 90% expats. So if they did try to even do that, literally everyone, okay, bye, I'm back to Canada, I'm back to the UK. Everyone would peace out. Like, the city would empty out. They'd have no money. The whole thing would just collapse.
Yeah.
So part of the reason why Dubai actually works well is just incentives. It's the same reason why some of the things are going wrong in our countries, right? Because the incentives are not aligned. What is good for the politicians is not necessarily good for the people. What is good for the Fed is not what's good for the people. What is good for, right? You literally have all of these military industrial complex, homeless industrial complex, big pharma, big food. Why is Americans suffering with all this obesity and all of these pharmaceutical drugs and whatever? Because there's this incentive of the profit motive to, right? It's like some people would say, oh, this is capitalism. It's like, it's a messed up version of capitalism.
Yeah.
Right. It's a horrible type of corporatism where people are so driven by greed and politics that they don't really care if innocent Americans are suffering, whether they're on the street, whether they're drug addicts, whether they're becoming morbidly obese because you're putting weird stuff in the food, whatever it may be. The incentives are not aligned. Whereas here in the UAE, and keep in mind, again, this is a country with virtually no taxes. It's aligned for everybody. So whether you are an Emirati, whether you're in the, so whether you're like, I think across the country, I think 20% of the population is Emirati. In Dubai, it's somewhere like 10, 12%. So that's quite unique and different. But they make it so that it's of benefit to the citizens. It's of benefit to the foreigners who are coming as expats. It's of benefit to, so they've basically created a situation where all of the incentives align. So on paper, here's another thing, this place is not, it's not a democracy. There's no politics here. There is no politics that anyone could, well, it's not a democracy. There's no political parties. There's no left. There's no right. There's no Democrats. There's no Republic. Like there's no political parties. And by the way, so there's like no division in this regard, right? No one is fighting about politics or whatever. Cause like, well, I don't have a say in it anyway. Like on paper, it's essentially a monarchy, right? So each emirate has its ruler, and then the Sheikh of Abu Dhabi is kind of like the overall leader of the UAE. And on paper, we in the West have been, democracy is everything. Democracy equals freedom. Democracy equals freedom. And like democracy and freedom are very different things.
Correct.
And I totally agree that, you wouldn't want a tyrannical monarchy, but when you have a monarchy which is incentivized and aligned with the people in the country, that's how you get a UAE. That's how you get a Qatar. That's how you get these places where, it's like on paper, if you were to look at it, you'd be like, oh, you don't have, you don't get a vote. You don't get this. And I'm not even going to go into the question about how much our votes really count in our countries. Right. But
is it rigged or not, guys? Like which one is?
And even then, I think I had a tweet once that went viral where I said like, in a monarchy, you get one option. In a democracy, you get two, right? It's like, 350 million people in America, two political parties. Like, I don't think that doesn't sound like really picking your leaders to me. And even then, you always somehow end up with a worse leader than the leaders here. So, it's just a matter of incentives. So the incentives make sense. But coming back to the 2A thing, I don't think the 2A would only work in America, man. There's no appetite for it. Very little appetite for it in any other country. And by the way, last point I'll make on this is one thing that's interesting is I actually find myself like explaining the 2A a lot when I'm not in America, like when I'm in the UK or I'm traveling through Europe or something, and I talk about spending time in the US, and someone always brings up about how crazy those Americans and their guns, and they're all crazy. I don't know why don't they just ban the guns, right? Like that's how everyone thinks. And when I explain the reason why it even exists, people always laugh and sneer at the concept of a tyrannical government. And I don't see how you can be a European and the concept, how are you German and the concept of a tyrannical government seems so far-fetched to you?
Well, you know what's even more bugged out? A tyrannical government where the bad guy was elected democratically. And I'm like, dude, there's a great book called Gun Control in the Third Reich by Stephen P. Halbrook. This dude gives consistent master classes on the Second Amendment or the importance of being armed in these nations that have become tyrannical. And he spared no expense on Europe and Germany. And he's like, listen, bro, now culturally, because Dubai and those places are relatively new, right? That culture, like when I'm in places where I don't have to carry a gun, because a lot of times people are like, well, Maj, you take a gun everywhere. Well, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I don't. Like when I go to court or when places where there's metal detectors, I make a decision and I'm going, do I want to go in here enough? yeah, okay, cool, I'll leave my firearm, right? But I would absolutely feel much more comfortable in a place where the reality is more than likely you may not need it. 100%. Bad stuff can happen anywhere. But in essence, I guess I'm kind of saying like, bro, I think I need to like look into like dual citizenship in Dubai. Like, do they
Well,
do that?
you can't get citizenship. It's virtually impossible to get citizenship, but it's very easy to get residency.
Ah, okay.
Yes. So citizenship is reserved for their people. It's reserved for the bodies. So
I'm not mad at it.
Yeah, I'm not mad at it either. Like their immigration policy is very smart.
Yeah.
It's very, very smart. And people think the crime here is low just because the punishments, if you were to commit it, are harsh. And that's not even primarily what it is. It's primarily actually due to just their policies. So you can't even be here unless you have a job. Right? Like you need a job, or you need to be running a company to even live here. So there's not like people who are just here and they're not
hanging out.
Right. And they're just hanging out, like getting into trouble. It's like, no, everyone here is gainfully employed in some way. You might be just sweeping the street. You might be a cleaner. You might be a maid, but you also might be a CEO. You might be an entrepreneur. You might be a YouTuber. You might be a mechanic, whatever the case is. But everyone's got a job. Your visa and your residency is tied to your employment.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's a massive factor. So everyone just kind of comes, and no one wants to cause trouble. Like people think there's all these like crazy laws and restrictions and this and this. It's just like, just be a normal, respectful human being, right? And you don't have to worry, right? You're not gonna get in trouble in Dubai for just like existing. It's like, no. And I'll tell you what here is, bro, you don't see police here. You don't see police, right? It's not like,
bro.
What I mean is like there is a police force, but it's not like, oh, people are behaving because there's police on every corner. It's like, no, you don't see the police. Like you see the police way more often in any European city across the USA. Like, you're walking, you see police, you see cop cars. Here, maybe like once a week I'll see a police car. But people just know the deal. No one's here trying to, be a predator and prey on other people and take people's stuff and all that. And if you do it, then they're going to kick you out. So, why would you?
Bro, these things that you're saying speak more to the cultural relevancy and importance of having a solid faith-based and whatever that faith may be, some sort of tying into system that, hey, this is my thing. I'm going to abide by these principles. Our government, or seemingly even more so limited government, is not going to interfere in the affairs as long as you handle yourself in alignment with what your cultural values you're supposed to represent. That's what it seems kind of like to me. And in those spaces, I'm at odds a bit, because my culture has been, I'm the founder of Black Guns Matter, right? That cultural component starts to become challenged as it relates to firearms, because it becomes, hey, I have the firearm for the space, not only just government, but for the actual bad person that I'm in Philadelphia, and there's like bad dudes right over there, right? So it challenges some of the listeners to kind of go like, hey, man, maybe we're kind of like leaning in a direction, not saying that we should get rid of the Second Amendment, but I'm saying maybe there's so much of a need for it because our culture has decayed, and that decay has rotted into the so-called political class. That's kind of like what this conversation is going to me. I just there's the way that you're putting it, there's no other way to kind of look at it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely, man. And again, across the USA, I think regardless of people's political perspectives, everybody is aware that there's some type of socio-cultural rot that is happening. Yeah. You're simultaneously making progress in some areas while regressing in other areas. When you look at familial breakdown, when you look at birth rate, when you look at crime rate in certain places, when you look at drug overdoses, when you look at certain things, it's like, well, like these are scary numbers, right? The USA is number one in some good things, and it's number one in some things you really don't want to be number one in.
Yeah.
right? The USA has the highest rate of single motherhood, for example, in the entire world.
Yeah.
Like that's not something to be proud of.
Right.
I think it has one of the highest abortion rates in the world, over a million babies per year. Like that is horrible. And these are things people sweep under the carpet. And by me even sort of bringing them up, someone might be like, oh, well, you know, like that, we shouldn't talk about that. But it's like, no, that's like a sign of many things going really, really wrong. Over 100,000 Americans a year are dying of drug overdoses.
Yeah.
I think the USA consumes USA is 4% of the world's population and consumes about 70% of the opioids, I believe. That's not good. You've got an obesity rate which is trending towards 50%. Like the USA has a lot of massive problems. It's got so many things going for it and so many positive things. Like it's one of my favorite countries in the world, hands down. And what do you know the thing that actually frustrates me most about the US?
What?
Is that it's a great country.
Yeah.
But it could be so much greater.
Yeah.
And it could be so much greater, especially if people like, sometimes I want to like collectively shake Americans, like just like the whole population, just be like, what are you doing? Like you've got such a good, even just geographically, I don't think people even understand how blessed the USA, just like geographically, you are blessed, right? Like that patch of land, you look like the world map. It's like
even being able to say, hey, our neighbors to the north of us, from a tactical standpoint, Canada's weaker than us, Mexico's weaker than us. Anybody that might be able to compete, we got an ocean protecting us this way, we got an ocean protecting us that way. If you guys try to fly over here or float over here, we definitely saw you coming. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And it's like, dude, like what are we actually doing? These holistic concepts that you're talking about, making sure that, you know, and I want the listeners and the viewers to actually understand, Zuby isn't just saying these things. And as an American, these are things that I'm saying when I travel around the country. Like there's things that I'm super thankful for. I remember the last time I was in South Africa and I was like, it's grimy here. It's
where were you?
Soweto.
Okay.
Now, certain parts, you know, whatever. Certain parts was just grimy, and it was like, listen, hide your cell phone. Like certain things are happening, right? Mm-hmm. And then when I got back to America, or even going to certain places where like there's just not random Wi-Fi everywhere, right? Yeah. There's an infrastructure that I'm super thankful for America. But to your point, at the same time, I'm kind of like, yo, bro, you are like drug addicts. You think life with no discipline will go, oh, you want to be rich and famous. Cool. Here's all of the rich and fame. Here's all of the drugs. Here's all of the food, right? Here's the GMO. Here's everything that's going to, you are free to do it, but you're now a drug addict. And so these are things that Zuby not only is saying that all Americans should be saying at the same time, but also Zuby isn't just saying these things. Zuby has a workout book. Zuby has, don't you got a children's book too?
Yeah, I got children's book, but yeah, The Candy Calamity.
Like Zuby's made music. These are things that I want the viewers to really, really, this ain't just us talking the talk. We got time to talk the talk today, but generally we're walking the walk. And I think that's very important for folks to listen to, folks that are of that and being well-traveled. You've been to 40, 45, 46 countries. I've been to maybe 10. And you know what I mean? Man.
That's a lot.
And I'm just kind of like, I'm going for reasons like, yeah, Rio. It was absolutely women. There was no question about why I was going there. It's not as the most pristine reasons, but my point in saying that is to the listeners is you have to listen to people that are creating products, that are objectively communicating about things that you might be a little offended by, but you got to ask yourself, is what he's saying accurate? You know, and just because the brother, you know, oh, you was raised in Saudi Arabia, these should be reasons for us to actually objectively listen to what someone's saying from an outside in perspective, and someone to his point of saying, hey, I might know more about the reason for the Second Amendment than you do as an American. I want to wrap up in the sense of I want to be respectful to your time, man. And
All
I
good,
just
bro.
want a few things, bro. I just want one, I just want you to tell folks where is the best way that they can get with you to communicate and support your product. I don't believe in the empty lip service of saying, yo, I really rock with that dude that you had on Zuby. And everybody should go support what you're doing with money. And I say that because being independent and maintaining objectivity in a land, in a world where everybody's saying, hey, you got to pick one side. If you're not on my side either, I'm going to ostracize you. You create your own island. And it's great when you create products from your own island, but the people need to support it. And so I'm 100% giving you all my cosign, my thumbs up. Like I said earlier on, Zuby was one of our very first dudes that were like, hey, bro, you doing something cool. Let's just chop it up. And so I'm so glad to see the progress, the evolution, the consistency, the objectivity. You know what I'm saying? And that's rare. So let the folks know where they can get behind the product, and just any final thoughts that you have for the people across the world that will hear this and hear your voice.
Yeah, sure thing, man. So I'll start with that, and then I'll tell people where to go after.
Yeah.
The message I have right now, and I'm really feeling this because I'm in a very peaceful place right now, but every time I go online, I can see all sorts of chaos in my home country. It's kicking off right now. In the US, it's always kicking off. And people are just so angry,
Yeah,
and divided and discouraged and worried and fearful. And I think it's really important for people to ground themselves, for lack of a better term. And me saying, I'm just one voice, but don't let yourself get psyoped into thinking like everyone is against you, or this group is like, there's a lot of we keep getting different flavors of identity politics popping up, and it seems to be baiting even more people into it than it used to. And I find that kind of concerning. Some of it's along racial lines, some of it's along religious lines, a lot of it's along, political, the left versus the right versus, and look, people are going to have their opinions and people are going to have their differences. And I'm not saying you need to like love and embrace and be friends with everybody. But when you have a country like the USA, for example, and people are getting so polarized that you have millions of Americans who literally like hate other millions of Americans.
yeah.
And that's not good. That's not a good trend. It's not a good direction. And I honestly think, I think almost all of it is manufactured. I don't think it's real. I think people are getting psyoped. I think through the traditional media and now through the social media, people are just being, it's easy to hijack people's emotions, and to kind of pit them against each other. So I just urge people to be cautious of that, because, I don't want to see this thing explode. I don't like seeing videos of cities on fire and people being beaten over the head, and just like, it's not necessary. I mean, your former president was quite literally almost murdered a couple of weeks ago. People have already forgotten about that one. Like, that's very serious.
Like, hey, it didn't happen. Maybe it was fake. Like, ugh.
Yeah, like that's not good, like you don't want to be getting into that type of territory. So that's my general message. And in terms of where people can find and follow me, I'm on all social media at Zuby Music. That's ZUBY Music. And if you would like to support me, if you'd like to check out my books, my music, my merchandise, teamzuby.com. That's the place you can get everything. In fact, if you're an American, all my merchandise ships from the USA. So you'll actually get it really fast. Go to teamzuby.com and you can get everything there.
Yo, bro, thank you so much for doing this, bro. I just genuinely appreciate it, man. I have been so excited. And I know sometimes when we run into each other, I think the last time we ran into each other, we was in Nevada somewhere.
Yeah.
And I'm just like so elated and excited for a positive dude, with a voice of reason and logic. It really, really inspires and motivates me to continue, because sometimes it can feel like you're the lone wolf, or it's like 8 people that actually use their brain anymore on the planet. So I just want to say thank you again, my brother, for your time. Everybody, please, please, please make sure you follow our brother here. Make sure you're supporting his work. share this all over the place, and donate to the work, pay it forward to others, be kind to each other, be safe, and be solutionary. Thank you, my brother.
God bless you, Maj. I appreciate you.
All right, peace.